As the UK government faces mounting pressure to suspend the arms trade with Israel, one politician has embarked on a special diplomatic mission. Yes, the MP for Fareham, Suella Braverman, dispatched herself to Israel to lobby the UK to increase its support for the country. Braverman formerly served as Home Secretary, but now is just a backbench MP with no cabinet or ministerial position. But that hasn't stopped her from holding talks with senior Israeli politicians and military figures. In a post on X, Braverman wrote this: "Today I met with senior military and political figures in Israel to discuss the war in Gaza and the tragic strike on the aid convoy. My thoughts and prayers go out to the family and friends of those killed. This was a terrible mistake for which Israel has rightly apologised." Well, so long as they've apologised. She also took the time to embark on a little media tour. The backbench Prime Minister spoke to BBC Radio 4 from Israel, insisting that the country was following the rules of war in Gaza and that she had seen the proof. Here's what she told the Today programme when they asked if Israel was breaching international humanitarian law.
The suggestion itself is absurd and frankly an insult to Israel, who's been going above and beyond the necessary requirements to ensure that civilian casualties are limited, to ensure that aid is received onto the Gaza Strip and distributed. I've seen evidence myself in terms of very up-to-date photographic evidence of plentiful food packages and trucks of food, water and medicines getting to the people of Gaza.
Well, so long as Suella Braverman, the woman who wanted to break international law by shipping people to Rwanda, doesn't think that Israel is breaking international law, I'm sure it's all okay. Ignore the other legal experts, witness testimony, and the International Court of Justice agreeing to hear a case that accuses Israel of committing genocide. Suella Braverman, MP for Fareham, says it's fine. Matter of fact, let's ignore the Israeli doctors who say that the law is being broken. This is a Haaretz story published today, citing a doctor working at an Israeli detention centre holding Palestinians detained from Gaza. The doctor told Haaretz that conditions for the inmates likely violated international law. The article reads, "Just this week, 2 prisoners had their legs amputated due to handcuff injuries, which unfortunately is a routine event," the physician said in the letter. He said inmates are fed through straws, defecate in diapers, and are held in constant restraints which violate medical ethics and the law. The doctor told reporters he has voiced his concerns in a letter sent to Israel's defense minister, health minister, and attorney general. The letter opens like this: "From the first days of the medical facility's operation until today, I have faced serious ethical dilemmas. More than that, I'm writing this letter to warn you that the facility's operations do not comply with a single section among those dealing with health in the incarceration of the unlawful combatants law." For their part, the IDF said they operated according to the law and within the framework when it comes to the treatment of detainees. Every procedure is documented and monitored and is done with extreme care for human dignity of the detainees in accordance with the principles of Israeli and international law. We just make people shit in diapers. That's dignity. Plus, Suella Braverman says everything is hunky-dory, so it's got to be fine. While on her Israel jaunt, she also took the time to give a long interview to The Telegraph in which she accused the US and the UK of, quote, backsliding when it comes to Israel. Braverman criticised the UN Security Council resolution passed last month, which called for a ceasefire in Gaza and said she was concerned that a, quote, pro-Palestine Foreign Office establishment view was influencing government policy. So pro-Palestine that the funding to a key aid organisation in Gaza remains suspended after unfounded Israeli allegations that UNRWA staff were linked to the October 7th attacks. But the UK has yet to suspend arms sales to Israel despite the 32,000 recorded Palestinian dead, the destroyed territory, or extensive evidence that humanitarian workers, including British citizens, have been deliberately targeted and killed by the country. Seems extremely pro-Palestine. Braverman didn't stop there, though. She also appeared to discuss specific Israeli military operations. This is a tweet from Israel's representative to the UN. "It was a pleasure to meet with UK MP Suella Braverman, a true friend of Israel. I expressed my gratitude for her consistent and unwavering support and discussed Israel's determination to enter Rafah, defeat Hamas, and return all our hostages." Now, he's referring to the Rafah offensive that Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has officially registered his, quote, concern about. This is what Sunak said regarding the threatened Israeli Rafah operation in February. We're deeply concerned about reports about a military operation in Rafah, given it's important to a provision. So what we've been calling for is an immediate pause in hostilities so we can get more aid in and hostages out, and then build the conditions for a sustainable ceasefire that remains the focus of all our diplomatic efforts. Foreign Secretary David Cameron also said last month that the fighting in Gaza must stop, and he added, that's what we need to happen rather than a Rafah offensive. Braverman's, quote, private mission to Israel was funded by the National Jewish Assembly, an organisation which counts, quote, supporting Israel as one of its 3 key missions. Her visit, even if approved by Rishi Sunak, which it probably was, could well further add to his reputation as an increasingly weak prime minister, because it's one thing to say, yes, you can go to Israel on this little trip, but it's another thing to let a backbencher post leadership-esque photo shoots and discuss official military strategy with high-level politicians, especially when you're fighting fire from the fact that 3 British citizens were just killed at the hands of that government. Priti Patel in 2017 had to resign from her role in the Foreign Office for holding undisclosed meetings with Israeli officials. But will Sunak sanction Suella, or will she continue to direct her own one-woman foreign policy from the back of the Commons? Helena, what is Braverman thinking?
So I think that a lot of people's kind of instant reaction to this would be, oh, look at a pro-Israeli lobbyists trying to influence British policy. And I think obviously there's plenty of that going around here. But actually, I think that's not what's going on in this specific instance. The specific instance that we're seeing here is Suella Braverman's own personal career goals and personal motivations. That's what she's very specifically doing here. You mentioned, of course, Rishi Sunak personally being a very, very weak prime minister. It took so many different kind of violations and underminings from Suella Braverman when she was on the front bench for actually to get removed from the front bench, because of course she has her own personal leadership ambitions. She knows that essentially a lot of what Sunak is kind of running on is kind of moved away from the kind of positions that she was trying to cater to in her role as Home Secretary, to replaced by somebody more quote unquote sensible in the terms of kind of James Cleverly in a replacement position as Home Secretary. And she explicitly tries to court the votes of a lot of people on the very kind of right wing of the UK politics at the moment. It's clear that she wants a kind of internal challenge. She knows that Rishi Sunak's future political career is dead in the water when it comes to what's happening at the next election, where the Conservative Party are almost certainly going to get absolutely annihilated at the election. And she is trying to position herself broadly within the party to try and fight for the right wing of the Conservative membership, but also be there as somebody who can then run on the fact that, well, there weren't enough tough lines taken on all of these different kind of issues within the discourse around how right-wing Sunak is or is not in terms of his policy and foreign policy prospectus, as well as, of course, implementing David Cameron as somebody seen as being a kind of more moderate figure who she can run against and say, well, actually, you lost the election because you weren't pro-Israel enough. You lost it because you allowed there to be hate marches on our streets. And that's clearly what she is taking the Israel-Palestine issue as her kind of central way of signalling to the far right just who she supports and just where she thinks the kind of direction of travel of discourse in this country is going to go. Like, for example, when she is signaling about like the hate marches and when she was signaling to the far right to try and get them to turn up on the Saturday before Remembrance Sunday, when there was this the Palestine protest where they went and essentially had this kind of brawl outside the cenotaph, is because she is following along from this kind of discourse that you got from, remember Isaac Herzog kind of talking about Israel as being the bulwark against the East, the bulwark against like the UK and European countries being next when it comes to the kind of Islamic influence, whatever it might be. And it's clear that she also buys into that with all of the discourse she's had from the American Enterprise Institute lecture where she criticized multiculturalism. It's very clear to me that her kind of explicitly pro-Western foreign policy, her explicit kind of anti-Islamic narrative that I've seen so far is going to be where she's going to try and take her own personal campaign for the Conservative leadership after the next election. And it's very dangerous rhetoric, of course, as we've seen, given what she said about kind of Rwanda, what she said about Palestine. But to try and make this just about what she's trying to do with regard to this conflict specifically, I think it's far more Machiavellian and kind of far more personal in trying to undermine Rishi Sunak, because she knows full well that Rishi Sunak can't like remove the whip, even though we'll come to that later, because she is such a kind of firebrand person in Conservative politics that it would be kind of breaking that kind of trust of his own membership if he were to take such a kind of factional expulsion from the Conservative Parliamentary Party on an issue such as this. So she knows she has free reign, and she will exercise it thusly.